Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me as always is my producer, Kevin Black. Another incredible guest this week. We are 3 for 3, knocking it out of the park with guests this week. Fresh off of a little bit of what I like to call a home and home series. This man had me on the Eye on College basketball feed earlier today when we were recording this Tuesday, May 24th. Now, it's a little bit later on in the day. He was kind enough to hop on the Draft Deeper podcast feed, and I'm incredibly excited and honored to have him on. CBS Sports writer, their own Kyle Boone. Kyle, how you doing, boss?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on. I will just repeat what I said earlier on the Eye on College basketball podcast YouTube channel. You guys do great work. I've been following you guys for a few months, and I think easily one of the best kept secret in draft online content in terms of just coverage. You guys have a passion for the draft, and I think there's a lot of people who cover the draft as a hobby that maybe aren't totally into it, or even do it full time as a job that, you know, it's kind of a grind, a little bit monotonous. But you guys' passion for it, the way that you cover it from so many different angles and really break down some stuff in ways that like makes me think, I really appreciate it. And so that's been really fun to kind of see you guys grow. And from kind of an outsider looking in, I really appreciate what you guys bring to the draft community.
Those kind words about no ceilings. I know our conductor of chaos, as he calls himself, Tyler Rucker, he's gonna eat those words up. But I appreciate your kind sentiments, and it's always nice to hear that somebody like yourself is watching and kind of paying attention to what we're doing. So I consider it an honor, and what better way than to talk about what we do at No Ceilings. What do we do at No Ceilings? Come on, we talk about the NBA draft. It's what we do 5 days a week, nonstop podcasts, written pieces, YouTube videos. So why not just start from a general outlook, Kyle? What are kind of some of your thoughts in general about the 2022 NBA draft class? You can talk about where you're at, where you're feeling temperature check, top of the draft, talk about some guys maybe towards like the back end of the first round, like from a talent group overall. How are you feeling about this draft class?
I'm pumped about it, dude. I'm pumped about it because I think the very top of this draft, there are some difference makers that teams are going to be able to scoop up. And being from Oklahoma, I'm absolutely thrilled that the Thunder have the number 2 pick. And I know you guys have blown out the Thunder draft coverage already with my buddy Andrew. And you guys should go back and check that out if you haven't already. But the top of this draft is really interesting because like Jabari Smith, I think right now we both agree is probably going to end up going number 1, but like Chet Holmgren, easily one of the best defenders that I've seen at the college level, could end up going number 2, like clearly a top 5 guy. Paolo Banchero, a guy who has just extreme polish in terms of his offensive skill set. And then Jaden Ivey, the guy who I have number 1 on the CBS Sports big board, is a top 5 guy. And I think a guy who is obviously going to be a long-term starter, but I think has all-star potential. So I feel like when we were talking about this a little bit off air, but we always kind of judge, fair or not, we always judge draft classes based upon the star power at the top.
Yeah.
And the star power at the top is very, very appealing. And even as you get down the list in terms of, you know, like the late lottery, the early 20s, there are a lot of really good prospects that can help teams out. And even I think if there's some teams in the 20s that are willing to take some risk, there's some guys who I think could be not all stars, but like really good NBA players. So I do this every year where I talk myself into thinking this is a fantastic draft. I'm at that point now. We're about a month away where I think this is a really good draft, and I'm really pumped about it.
Come on, let's keep the excitement going. That's certainly how we feel at No Ceilings. We're pumped about every draft class. We want to break these guys down. Before we get into some of the specifics, and the whole reason why I wanted to have Kyle on the show today, I sat down and did the same thing with Matt Babcock, holy cow, from Basketball News. We broke down his latest mock draft over there. I want to do the same thing with Kyle, break down his mock draft, which by the time you're hearing this podcast, he may have another one up. So maybe we'll have a few spoilers or teasers on this episode. But nevertheless, before we dive into some specifics from his mock, since you talked about some of the depth, Kyle, and that you are excited about this draft class, I've had this notion for a little bit now You mentioned the middle of the draft where teams are probably going to take some swings as they usually do in like the mid to late lottery. And that's certainly going into the middle part of the first round through the top 20. I think there's going to be a number of teams that strike gold in the 25 to 40 range because we can just go down the list of prospects we like. Like there are guys, we can go all the way out between like 25 to 45, like guys who have a legitimate shot to make rotational impacts in the NBA. There's steals every year, but I just feel like this year, especially when there's so many guys that we don't really know what to think about them fully, there's going to be some wild cards, some guys who fall just because there's that many names. I feel like somebody's going to strike gold near the end of the first round, beginning of the second. You feel the same?
Yeah, totally. And we had a draft call earlier today, and Gary Parrish made this point, and I totally agreed with him. Like once you get into like the late teens or the early 20s, that range through like the mid 30s, I feel like you could just toss the names into a bag and wouldn't be surprised in how they're drafted. So I'm certain, or at least I'm fairly confident, that most NBA teams don't feel that way. The smart teams have their order. They know exactly how they are going to draft if the board falls a certain way. And that's where I think this draft class is particularly interesting. Is there's going to be some guys who are real difference makers that end up getting drafted late in the first round, early in the second round. This happens every year, obviously, but this year in particular feels it feels a little bit more noteworthy than most. I mean, there's guys that are going to end up going in the late first and early second that I think are going to be starters long term in the NBA. That doesn't happen every year. This class in particular, it feels like it could absolutely happen.
So your mock draft, we'll try and focus in on round one. Maybe we'll bounce around a little bit past that, but we'll focus in on round one. So obviously we got to start at the top, and you alluded to it earlier. You are a Chet Holmgren guy. I am also a Chet Holmgren guy. You have him currently mocked at number one, which, by the way, you gave the disclosure. I've given the disclosure. We the intel that we're hearing, we think it's going to be Jabari Smith. That's what all the confident intel saying. But this is the part of the year so many smoke screens can be thrown around. Like we ultimately we don't know what the hell's going to happen, right? So it could still be Chet Holmgren. For my money, I would take Chet number one. He is my best player on my big board. Why do you feel the same way about Chet? What strikes you about with him?
This is more just a team philosophy thing than anything. This is the Magic front office that was instrumental in drafting Giannis. They drafted Mo Bamba several years ago. They love the wingspan. It's hard to imagine that Chet Holmgren is sitting there at number one and they say, hey, let's pass on this guy. Like this is a first team all wingspan type dude, 7 foot with, like 7'6", 7'7" wingspan. So elite defender, a guy who I think we both agree is kind of just scratching the surface in terms of what he can be on offense. Absolutely. He was really good on offense at Gonzaga, but it wasn't used that often. And that was in part because Gonzaga is absolutely loaded. They were a number one seed last season, and still Chet was kind of just another guy on offense. But the long-term appeal with Chet Holmgren, I think is pretty undeniable. Wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going number two, but for now, unless I definitively hear like, okay, the Magic are taking Jabari Smith number one, which it sounds like it's trending that way. But I kind of have to see it to believe it with them passing on Chet. And I'm kind of pinching myself at the thought that Chet could fall to number two for the Thunder.
But if he doesn't, Chet would actually go number one, Jabari would be the likely target for OKC at two. As an Oklahoma City guy, would you be disappointed with Jabari at all, or can you also buy into him just as much as you would want to buy into Chet Holmgren?
No, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I feel like there's a clear top two best options for the Thunder in this draft, and they're going to get one of the best two, which is either Chet or Jabari. I actually am not in love with the potential fit of Paolo Banchero in Oklahoma City. I think he would fill a need and would be a really good player in Oklahoma City, but Jabari just is such he's kind of an alpha in a way that like I don't think people fully appreciate. Like it's this like cliche draft coverage talk, but like he's got that dog in him, you know what I mean? Like just a really tenacious defender, like takes a ton of pride in the way that he plays, just always giving relentless energy, just always on it. And his 3-point shooting is really good. Like for his positional size, like I think that'd be a good fit for the Thunder. Again, assuming he falls to number 2, I think if he's on the board there and Chet is off the board, Jabari is the pick, I think, for Oklahoma City.
So another guy that you just wanted to say a whole bunch of nice things about him, a guy who you also believe has star potential. We didn't get into a ton of Jaden Ivey on the show earlier, but I want you to give your Jaden Ivey sales pitch and why you believe in him, because there are a number of people you talk to around the league or connected to the league who there's teams that have him like in the top 2 on their boards. Like this isn't just like a 3-man race with NBA teams as much as we probably would be led to believe in terms of like the general public. So give me your case for Jaden Ivey and maybe why some teams are feeling the same way that you do about him.
Yeah, this is secondhand information I've gotten, so this is not like direct reporting from me, but I know for sure at least one team has Jaden Ivey at number 1 on their board. He's a sophomore, so he's maybe a little bit older, not necessarily the guy who would end up going number 1, just in terms of his profile. But an elite athlete, a guy who can pressure the rim whenever the heck he wants. Really improved as a 3-point shooter from freshman year to sophomore year. Not only took a leap just in terms of his development, but went from like a pretty good role player to like he's an alpha on a top 10 college basketball team. And I think if you're projecting him at number 1, which I am, I'm betting on him being a future lead guard. And there are some absolute questions in terms of that projection.
Sure.
And we can get into those, but I mean, just his decision-making needs to improve. A lot of times when he's playing on the court, like he'll put himself in situations where like, he's driving to the rim, he jumps up in the air and he's caught and he has to make a decision. And it's usually a bad decision where he's throwing it away, just trying to do too much. His decision-making needs to improve. His passing needs to improve a little bit. Would love to see his defensive effort improve just a little bit. There's times where, he's either caught ball watching or he's just not engaged, doesn't take a ton of pride on that end. But I think long-term, his appeal as a future lead guard is pretty enticing. I think you have to have the right fit in terms of team for him to go number 1. And that's why I'm not projecting him to go number 1 in the mock draft, but that's why, just in a vacuum, that's why I would take him number 1 in any situation, basically.
I mean, he's arguably the best athlete in this draft class. So that obviously bodes well in his favor. And again, you have him mocked right now at 4 to the Sacramento Kings. I would agree with that. I think if they keep the pick and they don't do anything wild or funky, as some of the rumors that have come out a little bit over the last few days, I think that's where they would go as well, which would leave Shaedon Sharpe, the mystery man of the draft, as I wrote for NoCeilingsNBA.com. He really is the mystery man of this class at number 5 to the Detroit Pistons. However, we can talk about Shaedon. I get your thoughts on Shaedon, but the next guy, we brought this up on your show, Kyle. The next guy, your number 6 pick, Keegan Murray to the Pacers. I mentioned that I had said that he could possibly be in play for Detroit, at least along my line of thinking. You brought up that point before I even brought it up on your show.
Yep.
We would agree with you. We are big Keegan Murray people at No Ceilings. Why are you in on Keegan Murray, and why do you think he should get possible consideration as high as 5?
So I'm going to be honest. I'm not a huge Keegan Murray guy. And this is gonna crush your soul. I know. I love him. I think he's gonna be a really good NBA player, and I'm confident in that. But like, what's the difference between him and EJ Liddell? Like, similar size, can shoot the 3, both kind of alphas, good defenders. I don't know. Like, I would take him in like the 8 to 12 range as opposed to like the 5 to 8 range. And this is maybe more of like EJ Liddell propaganda than Keegan Murray hate. I really like EJ Liddell and having
we also like EJ Liddell a lot. Yep.
There you go. But yeah, like I think Keegan Murray is realistically in play at number 5, anywhere from 5 to like 12. I would just take him probably on the lower end of that, even acknowledging just an incredible shooter, a guy who's going to be a really good defender in the NBA. Like, the floor is very, very high for him. He is going to be a good NBA player. I'm just not sure in this draft, there are players that I would rather take swings on as like future stars, as opposed to Keegan, who, like, I don't think he's going to be a star. I just think he's been a really good NBA player. And that's more like just a philosophical difference that I'm kind of battling with personally. But totally, I think it's totally reasonable. If you want to take Keegan Murray, number 4, number 5, number 6 is where I have him currently in the mock draft. I think that's very reasonable.
All right. Well, if that's the case for Keegan Murray, you got to sell me on this next guy, man. And yeah. I've been up and down on Ty Washington all year. I'm down right now, man. I actually have him in the 20s on my big board when I went back to redo it. You have him in the mock draft at number 7 to Portland. Now, I will say that Matt Babcock told me, he reported on my podcast that he knows that or at least he thinks that Ty is not going to make it out of the lottery. And that was like the one thing he said on my podcast that made me kind of sit back in my chair. Like, what am I missing with Ty? Like, why can't I personally get there on him? But you mocking him in your mock draft on CBSSports.com, you also taking him in your mock draft that we did earlier today. Why are you in on Ty as a lottery prospect? What do you like about him?
The size is good, 6'3", 6'4". The shooting is fantastic, 35% from 3 as a freshman at Kentucky in a system that's a little bit stuffy for guards. There's been some really good NBA guards come through that system and not have that type of success. So him doing that as a freshman, I think, is really encouraging. He learned how to play off the ball at Kentucky because Severe Wheeler was on the ball. And I think that really helped kind of his maturation, his development. And on top of that, he's a really good passer and playmaker. This is a guy who has some shades of Tyrese Maxey to his game, just because I don't think he's purely going to be a 2 guard. Like, I think he can switch between the 1 and the 2. And that's why I'm higher on him. The playmaking that we saw just only in flashes, again, because Severe Wheeler was kind of the lead guard for Kentucky. I think is going to translate. I'm not entirely sure that he's going to be like a full-time starting point guard, but if you're going to get like one of those 1.5 guards in this range, Ty is the guy that I would take a gamble on. I think the passing and the playmaking is absolutely real. We already know he's a great shooter. The touch that he has on floaters is fantastic. It's a good free throw shooter. So all that stuff I think is going to translate to the NBA. And for that reason, admittedly, I'm a tad bit higher on Ty than most, but a little bit more bullish and just kind of buying the dip with Ty, just thinking long-term what he can be and acknowledging the fact that, like, he was injured for, a good stretch of the end of Kentucky's season. I don't entirely think we saw kind of what his ceiling can be, and his athleticism was a little bit zapped. But I think the athleticism, like all that stuff, is absolutely real. And I think we'll end up looking back in a few years and thinking, like, how did Ty Washington, slip to 12 or 13 like that? He's one of the best guards in this draft. So at number 7, that's where I'm comfortable taking him.
So you referenced earlier today the 17 assist game that he had. He got off to the season a little bit of a rough start. Then he started to find his groove, and then the injury bug hit him. So I guess it's more so some of my skepticism is around, I just don't have enough of a sample size that I'm comfortable with from an evaluation standpoint. So you're a firm believer in his skill set, that had he not gotten hurt, right? Had that not happened and he suffered the injury that he did, if he would have been healthy, that guy that we saw in that 17 assist game and through some of those good stretches he had in the season, you're comfortable at this point saying you think he would have been more of that guy as the season would have went on?
I don't know that necessarily he would have like taken over the playmaking role from Severe Wheeler, because
but then more of like a difference maker.
No, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think he was just finding his groove, and then the injury happened, and then he tried to test it. He injured himself again. He tried to test it, and it's just like could never totally get comfortable and fully healthy. And, I'm not concerned about the injury. I don't think it's going to be a long-term injury or anything, but it's just one of those nagging injuries where if you're an NBA prospect, you're a potential one and done guy. you're not able to completely put your best foot forward at the end of the season, where a lot of these one and done guys like Jeremy Sohan, AJ Griffin, like some of these guys are kind of peaking as the end of the season comes along. Ty was not able to do that. But this is, again, you're kind of projecting context, future potential. And with Ty, like, I think he kind of checks all the boxes, and I'm just kind of hoping that some of the athleticism and the lack of athleticism that we saw at the end of the year will start to come back once he gets fully healthy.
Does any of that pop or lack thereof at different points throughout the year give you some cause to pause about AJ Griffin as well? Because he's been a name that I've been back and forth on him as well. I mean, the shooting kind of speaks for itself, but there are real concerns about other parts of his game due to that. Does that concern you personally at all, or you want to buy into the shooting and the sample size that we have and all the good stuff?
No, but I think it's important to remember, like, to keep in mind, like, it's one of many data points that I think you have to take into consideration when you're scouting AJ Griffin. Yeah. If there was no injury history, I think we're talking about a guy who's like a top 3 prospect in this class.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And like Audie Joseph, my editor, longtime editor, basically during the season was like, are we sure like Paolo Banchero's Duke's best prospect? And I'm like, good point. I'm not entirely sure of that. And so he's a guy that I've kind of waffled on, kind of gone back and forth on, because, he checks all the boxes in terms of the frame, 6'6". He's really athletic, but he's not like explosive. The shooting is going to translate. It's 44% from the 3-point line as a freshman. And hopefully the defense will come around. But, wings who are that size, who have that skill set, are going to translate. And I think if you're just kind of ranking this class in terms of like future star power, AJ Griffin should absolutely be near the top of the list. And you have to hope that kind of the injuries, which he's battled honestly for several years now, can either be in the past or they're not going to hamper him in a way that they have, obviously at Duke and going back to his high school career.
No, I agree. I think if the medicals check out for him and he has enough of a clean bill of health. I mean, he was one of the first guys in this draft class I talked about on Draft Deeper coming into this cycle. He was one of the top 6 guys. And I agree with you. I think he'd probably be a top 4 talent. I'm not sure if he would surpass any of those top 3 like bigs, but I think he would be much more in play for the Kings at number 4. And I know that they did interview him at the combine. So there could be some crazy stuff. There's crazy stuff every year in every draft, but there could be some stuff where AJ Griffin rises all the way up that high. So where you have him at number 8 in the mock should not shock anybody. And there are a lot of people in No Ceilings who would agree. So just to rattle off some names in the back half that you have here: Jeremy Sohan to the Spurs at number 9, Ochai Agbaji to the Wizards at 10, Benedict Mathurin to the Knicks at 11, Ousmane Dieng at number 12 to the Thunder, Jalen Duren to the Hornets at 13, and Johnny Davis to the Cavs at 14, that's a name I think you and I were a little shocked. It's like we do this exercise. Johnny Davis is at 14. Yeah. He's not like a top 10 guy, dude. Where are you at on Johnny Davis personally? Because like there are some skeptics. We have one person at No Ceilings, Tyler Metcalf, who has him as like his 4th best prospect.
I love it.
So
I love it.
So is that kind of more in line with where you are? Or you think he's, by your evaluation, you think he's a back end lottery guy?
This is the range where I would be comfortable taking him. He's number 10 on the big board right now. So okay. I'm a little higher than where I'm currently projecting him. Just in the fact that in this draft, like, he's a guy who I think I think he may be the most NBA ready in terms of all the guards in this draft.
I would agree.
And so 6'5", he's a really good defender, multi-positional defender. I have to hope that, the 3-point shooting is closer to where he was as a freshman than where he was last season. But the shooting is going to translate. I think he's going to be a good creator in the NBA. And so all of that, I feel like the frame, like just everything about that screams, top 10 pick to me. So Johnny Davis is a guy that I have top 10, 14 in our mock. I can't imagine he goes this late in the draft, but
it could happen.
It absolutely could. And we were talking about this earlier. Just there's going to be some guys who end up slipping just because this draft is so loaded that we're going to go like, whoa, Jalen Duren went like 18 or something. there's going to be some really good value for teams that I think are picking in like this late lottery, late teens area.
So there were two things about your mock draft that really stood out to me. No, it was not Ty at 7. As much as I don't have him that high on my board, like I don't think that's crazy. Like I think somebody's going to take a guard, and if they're going to take a guard, I would agree with you. I think Ty is probably the best, quote unquote, closer to like the lead guard mold in this draft class.
Yeah.
Two names that really surprised me: Dyson Daniels outside of the lottery. That one threw me for a little bit. You have Dyson actually mocked to the Rockets 17, which if I'm a Rockets fan and somehow they got Paolo Banchero and Dyson Daniels, I mean, holy smokes, that would be quite the coup. But where are you at personally on Dyson Daniels? Do you think he's a lottery talent? Do you think he's probably better suited being taken outside the lottery? Where are you at on him?
All right. So here's my grand scheme, Nathan. I'm just going to tell you straight up. I am trying to tank the draft stock of Dyson Daniels so he falls to number 12 for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm kidding, of course, but I cannot, even looking at it now, I'm like, I cannot believe I put him at number 17 in the mock draft. He's going to end up being top 10 on my next prospect rankings big board. My next mock draft, he will be a lottery pick. And I think he went number 10 when we did this mock draft exercise earlier today, if I'm not mistaken. A guy that I think is easily going to go in the lottery and might go in the top 10. He's been linked to the Spurs a lot, and I'm not sure if that's just because the Spurs have taken an interest in him or just the fact that he kind of fits the mold of what the Spurs like. But either way, like 6'6" guy who, well, you tell me, because I'm interested in your take on this, because I don't totally see him as a true point guard, but I think if you're taking him with the top 10 pick, you probably think he's going to be some sort of primary playmaker, right? Or what's the appeal with him? Because obviously defensively he's a monster, but I'm just not entirely sure about some facets of his game on offense. Like, wasn't a great 3-point shooter with the G League Ignite.
Got better though. Second half of the year, got better.
He did get better. He did get better. And he has some really creative passing in terms of what he can do as a playmaker, but I'm not entirely sure. Again, going back to like the Ty Washington discussion, I think Ty can be a potential lead guard. I'm not entirely sure that is the case with Dyson, but I'm willing to be talked out of that. Like, I'm kind of not totally sold one way or another with Dyson Daniels.
He's a guy, when you evaluate him when he has the ball in his hands, right? Because he did have to play a lot of point guard, a lot of lead guard for G League Ignite to kind of bring that team together. When he's coming off that screen, he is so intelligent with how he uses that screen and how he sets himself up after he gets off that screen. He can keep somebody on his hip. He recognizes the space that he has. He has a good floater, good touch on the floater.
Yep.
You mentioned some of the shooting. I agree. I think I want him to improve a little more as a mid-range shooter and as a three-point shooter, although he did second half of the year with Ignite. A lot of those guys really improved, to be honest, when they got a little more comfortable playing at that level. But then you mentioned the defensive impact. I think I see him, and I said this earlier on your show, I see him as more as like a Tyrese Halliburton kind of guy coming in early, like a secondary playmaker and creator. But I think eventually he's going to get to the point where he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot more often. And you hear him talking at the combine and interviews and some things you hear behind the scenes. Like, he believes that he has star upside in this league and that he's going to become not just a better creator for others as he gets older, but also a better shot taker and shot maker at the NBA level as well. And just when you evaluate where he's at with that near 6'8" size, that length, man, it's hard to talk yourself out of him. And I guess the one thing that I come back to, Kyle, and I'll be curious to see if you agree on this point at least. I started looking at these teams in like a mock draft scenario and where they could possibly go. It's hard for me to necessarily say that this team X in the lottery can't use a Dyson Daniels.
Yeah,
and that's why I think that his stock, in my eyes at least, kind of has to be in that top 10 range by default.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And again, I'm raising my hand here. Have him too low at number 17. And in fact, Josh Giddey's impact last season with the Thunder, I think has kind of helped his stock as well, because Dyson Daniels, like, okay, even if you're not projecting him as like a true lead guard, the guy who's going to run your offense, he's just a connector. Like, he's so smart. He's so intelligent as a cutter. He knows how to make passing reads, very high level IQ. Just a guy who I think is going to be a solid NBA player. Like, size wise, kind of matches up with Lonzo Ball. He's not the creative passer that Lonzo is, but I like that as a, maybe a comp. And just like Lonzo, like, if the 3-point shot is going to fall in the NBA, which, again, if you're taking him with a lottery pick, you expect that it eventually will, then I really like him, as a clear lottery guy. And I think the defense is obviously going to translate. I
like that comp. I know my producer, Kevin Black, likes that comp. He is one of the biggest Lonzo Ball fans that I know in my life. So I know that he's rooting for that comp to definitely shake itself out as well. A little bit later in your first round mock, the two Ohio State guys, we kind of mentioned one, EJ Liddell, and then we can talk about the other one, Malachi Branham. Which do you like more as a prospect if you had to choose between the two?
Yeah, I'd take the gamble on Malachi for sure.
Okay.
I'm enamored with, first of all, he's got really good positional size, 6'5", but just a guy who, like, fits into a very neat, tidy bucket as a scoring wing in the NBA. And I think that's super valuable. Like, if you're going to shoot over 40% from three in the NBA, like, that is real. That is going to translate. And he's, he was 42% from three last season at Ohio State, got even better in the second half of the season, just really turned it on. And the offense is absolutely going to translate. I think the defense, he had some good flashes, some good spurts on defense. And I think that will be, I'm not entirely sure it'll be a strength, but I don't think it'll be a liability at the NBA level too. So just in the fact that he's going to be a bucket getter, I know what his role is. I'm very confident that he's going to be a good scorer in the NBA. Very confident taking him with a top 20 pick. And he's a guy who has been rising over the last, 6 weeks or so. And I think the Malachi hype may be a little bit too much for me, but I'm topping out right now. Like, I have him on the big board. I'm looking here. I have him at number 16, and I can't. I'd be surprised.
If I told you I have him at top 9, would that make you fall out of your chair?
I think that's about as high as I've seen anywhere. It doesn't make me fall out of my chair, but I mean, I like it. I like the boldness because you have to be really confident in your scouting report to have him that high. And you've obviously done the work. So you feel good about taking him with a top 10 pick. I think top 10 is a tad rich for me, but like lottery range, late lottery, totally cool with that. The guy who's still young, was an unexpected freshman. His developmental track, the way that he has matured over the last year, even from, the early in his freshman season at Ohio State to the end of the season, very encouraged by that. And I think we're probably splitting hairs if you're kind of arguing Malachi Branham versus EJ Liddell. I think they're both going to go within like 5 picks of each other. But absolutely a guy that I'm super high on and have him as a lottery pick right now.
So you mocked EJ at 23 to the Brooklyn Nets. There are 2 guys on our No Ceiling staff. Corey Tulaba is a Chicago Bulls fan. Tyler Metcalf is a Minnesota Timberwolves guy. They're both hoping that one of their teams takes EJ Liddell, and both those teams are inside the top 20. I know you like EJ. There's been a ton of positive buzz about EJ, obviously on the court, everything he did at Ohio State, but as well as off the court, just the kind of guy he is, the interviews he's absolutely nailing. At this point, do you think EJ is going to be there for one of those 2 teams? Or do you think there's any shot he goes even higher than like 18 and he like challenges towards the lottery?
I don't think he'll be there at 20. That's my take.
Okay.
I think he'll be a top 20 pick.
Beautiful.
And this is part just purely projection, but part like hearing some buzz that, like, for example, when I had him in my mock draft, I think at like 28, I heard some feedback on that. Like, yo, you look like an idiot type feedback. And so I was kindly corrected that his range is most likely probably like 15 to 20 as opposed to like 25 to 30 where I initially had him. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like hey, you're wrong, you're an idiot. It's like, hey, let me help you out here. This is probably like what we're thinking on him. And so I think 15 to 20 is totally reasonable. The knock on him, like, I think one concern I had was he's 6'7", but is he like undersized for his position? I mean, I think maybe a little bit, but again, he doesn't play like he's 6'7". Like, so I go back and forth on that. I ultimately decided it really doesn't matter, because if you play like you're 6'10" and 250 and you're only 6'7", 240, doesn't matter.
Exactly.
I don't think it does. And so the shooting, the defense, like all that's going to translate. I feel like 15 to 20 range is about right for EJ Liddell.
So the last guy I'll ask you about in the first round, and then we'll do a fun question. I'll just ask you for a name off the board, anybody who's really piquing your interest. But Kennedy Chandler, mocked to the Bucks at 24. I think he's a first round prospect. I do. The other interesting tidbit, I mentioned the Ty Washington tidbit that Matt Babcock gave me. The other one was that he thinks Kennedy Chandler is probably going to be a top 20 pick. And I'm not in love with Chandler as a prospect in terms of what I see when I break down some of the film. But Kyle, you're a college guy. What I can't get myself around that brings me back to him is that he helped lead a pretty veteran-laden Tennessee team, and they won an SEC tournament championship. Like, for a team of vets to respect a freshman point guard and actually buy into what he brings to the table, just from a leadership standpoint, like, that's pretty special stuff. And the fact that he was able to come in despite some of the concerns and win at a really high level, like, NBA teams and scouts, like, they're smart people. They're going to take that into account. So that's what brings me back on the train with Kennedy. Is there anything in particular that stands out to you as far as his game, or you kind of agree for some of the same reasons?
No, totally. And who was a former 5-star recruit who played under Rick Barnes, who had nowhere near the same impact that Kennedy Chandler did a year ago? It was Jaden Springer, a guy who I had as a lottery pick in my rankings. And Springer was really productive, but he didn't have the same impact that Kennedy Chandler was able to have as just kind of the lead dog, the alpha, the guy who really kind of orchestrated what Rick Barnes wanted to do in Tennessee. So I'm not, again, I don't think that he's a top 20 pick. I actually have him outside my first round projections right now. I probably need to update that post combine, but the speed stands out. The passing stands out. I think that his size is probably just the biggest concern for me, just projecting him to the NBA. He is the smallest prospect of anyone I have in the top 60. And size doesn't mean everything, but if you're only 6 foot, I'm just a little concerned that, like, you're drafting a potential really good backup as opposed to like a starting caliber point guard. And that's kind of my Kennedy Chandler hesitation at the moment. Happy to be proven wrong. This was a guy who I had in my top 10 preseason. Easily one of the hardest to pin down for me in this draft.
His athletic testing confused the living hell out of me, Kyle, because he had a ridiculous vertical jump, but yet on his jump shot, he barely gets up off the ground. And that's part of the concern with him, scoring oversized. That confused me a little bit. I don't know. That's just me, but we hit on a lot of names in the first round of your mock draft, Kyle. Give me one name who has really piqued your interest in going back and evaluating for where you're going to go in your next mock draft. Any name outside of the top 30 that you definitely want to get in there next time around?
Outside the top 30?
Outside of the 30 guys you have in there right now. Anybody who you're like, I got to get him in the top 30 next time around. I can give you a name. I can definitely give you a name.
Yeah, give me a name.
We mentioned him earlier in the day, man. Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara.
Yeah, you're right.
You got to get this guy in the first round, man. I'm telling you, we've been buzzing about him at No Ceilings. And again, as I said on that pod, I will not take the credit. That's Tyler Rucker's boy. I did a mock draft pod myself after the lottery. And again, we're not doing that mock based on anything that we're hearing as a collective. We're doing it based on what we would do. I was bold on that mock for a few picks, but particularly for the Charlotte Hornets. They got 2 picks I think where they go in this draft, they got to nail those 2 picks because they're going to be in a pressure situation to win, or at least start to win with LaMelo Ball in the fold. Like they got to nail those 2 picks. And I look at a lot of these names, Kyle, that we can talk about, like the 16 all the way to like the 40 range. I have a lot of confidence in what Jalen Williams can bring to the table on both ends of the floor. I picked him at 15. And you know what?
Wow.
A lot of people ended up saying like, oh, is he a lottery pick? Like after I did that, I'm like, dang right. He should be talked about. Maybe not as like a lottery pick, but like, I think top 20, top 25, I'd be shocked at this point if he wasn't picked in that range. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I'm in fact, you just asked me to think of someone. I have written down Jalen Williams.
There it is.
I love him. He's a guy who is going to be top 30 on the next big board rankings. Still doing my mock draft, but at the moment, he's not in the current mock draft. Might be in the next one. Jalen Williams is a guy who I think I did not have him in the mock draft before. He will be in the mock draft again. And then Pat Baldwin Jr., someone who you're doing the grimace face for those who are listening. And yeah, like I agree. It's really hard to pin down exactly like where to put him in this draft. Like this is a guy who at one time was ranked as the number 1 recruit in his class. He's dealt with injuries as a freshman at Milwaukee, playing under his dad, dealt with injuries as a senior, only played a few games and ended up missing the rest of the season. But I think he did well for himself at the combine, just the size that he has. He measured out a lot taller than I thought he would. The shooting for his size, positional size, I think is fantastic. Have him number 37 in my rankings, which just feels criminally low. And he feels like a guy that if someone has some tolerance in terms of what they're willing to take on from a risk perspective in this draft, if he goes like 15, wouldn't shock me at all.
Wouldn't shock me either.
Yeah, just like one of the widest ranges of any prospect in this draft. But I'm starting to come around to the idea that I'm not totally confident in my rankings having him that high, but in my mock draft, I'm starting to think it's sounding more and more like he's going to be a first round pick. And I would imagine he stays in the draft. And if he does stay in the draft as kind of sounds like what I'm hearing, he's probably going to end up being a top 30 guy.
I love it, man. Keep the Pat Baldwin propaganda going. I personally love it. I still want to have him as like a top 25 guy myself, potentially top 20 guy. I want to believe. So
yeah.
Kyle, this was an awesome podcast. I seriously can't thank you enough, like I said, for coming on, giving me some
Sure.
a little bit of time here at Draft Deeper. Just one more time for my audience, please plug yourself, plug your socials, plug everything that you do for CBS Sports, because more people need to find you and follow your work and pay attention, because you gave me the time of day, so I would hope my audience certainly checks out everything you're doing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, you can follow all my stuff at cbssports.com. We have a great team, David Cobb, Gary Parrish, Matt Norlander, who does a really good job covering the draft, and very fortunate to be on that team of stars, just another guy in that mix. And yeah, we'll have a ton of, mock draft coming on Friday. Norlander and I are working on a story about like the race for number 1. I think it may be starting to come into the picture a little bit, but very excited to talk to some scouts and kind of get like an in-depth analysis of like how the NBA views the top of this draft with, specifically Chet Holmgren, Jabari Smith, Paolo Banchero, and Jaden Ivey. So very excited about that. And yeah, just thanks for everyone for listening. And again, if you guys are listening now, you guys are doing a great job. Keep following the No Ceilings team. They know what they're talking about. So very excited to be on the podcast with you for sure.
Thank you again for those kind words, Kyle. And I'm the guy at No Ceilings who keeps tab on all the big board updates and the mock drafts and updates our database of where everybody's going. So between you and Gary and Matt, I'll be watching. Don't worry. I'm going to watch it, and we might have some conversations in the coming days, depending on where you go next. But again, thank you so much, everybody out there listening to this episode of the podcast. If you aren't subscribed already, please make sure you go do so wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Make sure you're following the No Ceilings Collective at No Ceilings NBA and are subscribed to the No Ceilings Substack, NoCeilingsNBA.com. Awesome draft content Monday through Friday, every day of the week. We're hitting you with something new, as Kyle alluded to earlier in the show. Keep coming back for more. We will have plenty leading up to draft day. But until then, thank you all for listening to this episode. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.